Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Marianne Hensley. I'm the Vice President of Media Operations here at FreightWaves, and we're excited to present today's webinar in partnership with Uber Freight. Today, we're going to be exploring how companies can gain greater transparency around the driver experience at freight facilities through facility insights and reviews. We'll be hearing from Sameer Dohadwala, Head of Central Operations at Uber Freight, and we'll also have a live Q&A with him following the presentation, so feel free to send in your questions through the Q&A button as those come to you. Before we get started, just a quick housekeeping item. If you have any issues during the webinar, please feel free to reach out to our team via the chat function in your Zoom control panel, and again, send those questions for Sameer through that Q&A button in your control panel. At this point, we'll go ahead and get started, so welcome, Sam.
All right, thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sameer Dohadwala, and I lead our Central Operations org here at Uber Freight. My team's responsible for a number of different areas, from network quality to efficiency and automation, tracking load logistics, and then, of course, facilities, which we're going to discuss today. I've been at Uber over 3 years, and I've actually held several different roles across both our freight team and our ride-sharing business. And that's actually a great segue to where I want to start this conversation. And that's with our broader Uber business, because that really tells a story about how we got into freight and what we're doing there. So for those of you that don't know Uber, which hopefully is very few of you at this point, we built our business really by transforming consumer transportation within cities. If you think back 10 years ago, I'd ask the question to most people, how strange would it have been to get into a random person's car, or to pick up your phone, press a button, and expect a car to just show up and take you where you need to go? In under 7 years, we've delivered 10 billion trips in hundreds of cities around the world, and we've become the only global, profitable ride-sharing business. And while a lot of what we do seems simple on the surface, and by the way, that's by design, it's actually really, really complicated. And the key to our success has really been our ability to digitize the physical world to create really liquid, reliable marketplaces. And it's that fundamental underpinning of digitizing the physical world that's our real competitive advantage. We've replicated that same playbook we used for ride sharing into a number of new businesses. Many of you have heard of Uber Eats, our global food delivery business. Press a button, get a meal. Jump, our micromobility solution of bikes and scooters that take you the last mile. ATG is our investment into self-driving technology as we look to the next 10 years. And many people's favorite, Uber Air, which is where we're literally building flying cars. And the question I often get is how? How has Uber expanded so rapidly into so many different business lines in such a short period of time? It really comes down to what we call the power of our platform. And you can see some of the components of it listed here on this page. I'm not going to go through all of them, but let me point out just a few. Marketplace. And this is really about our ability to match massive supply and demand at scale. You can think about things like demand prediction, supply surging, really complex pricing algorithms. Maps and routing. What's the best way to get somebody or something from point A to point B? Things like route optimization, pickup drop-off experiences, ETA forecasts. And then finally, data. So a fun fact for everyone, in the time I've been talking just on this slide, we've processed within our internal Uber data systems 1.4 trillion unique pieces of data. Every single minute. That's the kind of scale of data that Uber is processing every single day, 365 days a year. And so that brings us to Uber Freight. Freight is the obvious next step in our journey as we think about building a first to final mile logistics company. We're going from moving people to small things to big things. And as you heard me talk, with Uber Freight, we're really taking the expertise we've built in our other businesses and applying it to the biggest challenge yet in the supply chain, over-the-road transportation. It's where 80% of all logistics spend occurs, and we really want to be at the center of it. And you can see on the page, the tenets of freight are very simple. Be reliable. Just like Uber rides, when you press a button, you know that ride is going to get there. We apply the same logic to freight. When you order a truck, it should get there on time with no issues. It should be transparent, both in the way of how we do things, but also the ability to see your loads in real time as they go from point A to point B. And flexible, I think, speaks for itself. The world changes fast. All of our businesses change fast. We need to move and change quickly alongside our customers that we work with every day. So Uber's well positioned to enter this market. The other question I get a lot is, why is now the right time? And the reality is we're in the midst of a really massive digital transformation that is making this a great time for Uber Freight. I'll talk about a couple of these quickly. The first is smartphone penetration. It has really exploded. Everyone from large fleets to owner-operators are running parts of their business from the palms of their hands. And that opens up opportunities for us at Uber Freight. We're also entering the golden age of digitization. Sensors are cheap, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. And we can capture all of that data. It allows us to do things we could never do before, to optimize entire networks and build deep predictive modeling. For us, the bottom line is we're reaching a point where full visibility and connectivity across the supply chain is really within reach. And I recognize that sounds nice, maybe a bit vague and techy. So let me share a couple specific proof points of what that means for us. On this page, I'll talk about a few of the data-driven ones, and we'll talk about some of the products as we get into facilities. So first, we've aggregated our driver history, their location data, their preferences. It allows us to know where our drivers are, where they're going, where they want to be going. And that allows us to recommend specific loads and routes, so we can actually get more capacity and utilization from the same network. We've also developed complex marketplace models that allow us to predict supply and demand imbalances to make sure we always have trucks available for the loads on our network at the right price and at the right time. And really all of this comes together to ensure that we're creating the most reliable, transparent, and flexible network, like I mentioned. And it wouldn't be Uber without an app for our drivers. And at Uber Freight, we actually built two products for our drivers and carriers. First, we have an app largely for our owner-operators that it's been downloaded over 500,000 times. We also have a desktop experience to serve the operations of some of our larger fleets. And again, these products really are what allow us to bring the full power of the network to carriers of all sizes, and then in turn our shippers. And so here's what it looks like. Here's what it looks like at a macro level. We're able to serve fleets of all sizes and apply that at a global scale. And in under 2 years, we've expanded to Europe and Canada. I'll give this video a second to play out. All right. I love this video because it shows how quickly we've built and how dense our marketplaces are becoming at a macro level. But at a local level, it also means our freight's always being covered. Trucks are always available and online. This is actually a real view of just a few of our cities in our network that Uber Freight operates in. And there's an amazing stat that I like to share sometimes. 92% of the loads in our network have been viewed within the last 10 minutes by drivers. And all of this brings us to what we're here to talk about today, which is our facilities. I talked earlier about how we really care about using our data in really new and innovative ways. I talked about the importance of connecting shippers and carriers. This really all happens and comes together at our facilities. And through our facility ratings and insights solution, which I'll talk more about here, we've built a product that gives carriers a voice but also makes their voice relevant to the operations of our shippers. So I'm going to share a short video that explains a bit more about why we're so excited about investing in this facilities product. All right. It's a very fun marketing video. Let's talk a little bit more about how this actually works and then what we do with this data. And that's the really interesting part. So first of all, how it works. Every single time a driver takes a load on our platform, they have the opportunity to rate and review the facilities they interact with. If you've ever taken a ride on Uber Rides, it's very similar. They can evaluate facilities on any number of factors that are important to them, from dwell times to amenities to friendliness of staff, and they can drop those comments into the additional notes section along with a star rating on a scale of 1 to 5. And for us, the best part is this feedback goes directly to the shippers who can use it to improve their facilities, improve their overall network, and get feedback directly from the carriers. And you can probably guess our drivers love it too. The majority of trips that are taken on our platform get a facility rating. And in the time that we launched this, we've amassed over 500,000 ratings. Now, I mentioned that our ratings go straight to shippers, and I want to show you a little bit more about how that works. So we built a facility insight tool that all of our shippers have access to, and it compiles and visualizes all of the facility rating data for our shippers. So in the tool, you can actually go see your ratings by facility. You can see things like the average dwell time, the on-time percentages. You can see ratings breakdowns by time of day. You can see long-form comments from drivers to understand their pain points, their challenges, or what they love about the facility. It's really robust, and it offers feedback that our shippers could never really see before. And in many cases, we're actually able to even start tying this back to the dollar impact that it has for our shippers, which I know is top of mind for a lot of folks. So what that means is we can tell you how much you will save to your bottom line for every point of ratings increase you achieve. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. But before I do that, I want to talk about one of the unique ways that we actually use these facility ratings to help both our shippers and our carriers. And it goes back to our ability to connect the digital and physical worlds. We're not the only ones that can launch facility ratings. We're not the only ones that aggregate data, but the way we take that and bring value to the real world is unique. We actually work with our shippers to not only pinpoint poorly performing facilities using the data that we've aggregated, but we also help to actually fix and improve those facilities when we identify them. And this is a really crucial point for us because our perspective is that data is only as good as what you can do with it. And we're doing things with our facility data to help our customers that nobody else is doing. So let me show you what I mean. We recently worked with a large shipper of ours to improve a specific facility in their network. We identified this facility as really ripe for improvement based on our facility ratings data. It was actually the poorest performing facility in that shipper's network, and it was a huge outlier. When we shared this information with them, they were as curious as we were to understand why. Why was this facility so poorly performing from the perspective of drivers? So, equipped with our insights, we went down to the facility, we actually walked the floor with the shipper, and we helped them. We helped them to connect the dots on what they were doing operationally that was leading to these poor ratings. And the amazing part was, we were able to find a ton of clear, simple, actionable recommendations. And these weren't hard recommendations. These weren't amazing new ideas. These were recommendations that became obvious because of the data we had and that we were able to surface to them. So let me give you a couple examples from this page. From our data, we knew that there was a dip in ratings in the afternoon time during their peak period. This was actually also when they went through a shift change. And this was the first time they actually saw how much that shift change was impacting their performance and drivers' ability to get in and out of the facility. Once they saw the dip right as the shift change was happening, they were armed with that knowledge. We were actually able to implement a quick, small swing team that could come in to streamline the operations and to make sure that there was coverage during that time. It was an easy solve once they had visibility into the problem. Another example, this facility's main KPI was units shipped out to the customer, but they were not utilizing their outbound dock doors effectively. And that was showing with the increased dwell times that were coming through. We analyzed the data with them, and we ended up shifting some of their inbound lanes to their outbound dock doors. We moved some drop trailers, and we immediately opened up capacity. As a result, we saw detention and dwell times go down, and we saw increased capacity for our carriers to get in and out of the facility. There are a ton of other similar improvements that we've driven with this facility and many other facilities and shippers in our network. And the best part of all of this for us is the team at the facility knew these were the right answers. They just needed to see the data and get the transparency to fix these problems. In this case, once they had the data, we didn't have to convince them. They implemented these changes within a week of our visit. So how did it go? You're probably asking that. The results speak for themselves. In a matter of weeks, our ratings went up significantly. But more important than that, we saw a real cost savings. Our dwell time went down 40%. Our detention frequency and costs went down significantly. Right? Ultimately for us, we took the data, we worked to implement real changes, and we had happier carriers, more efficient facilities, and real dollar savings for our customers in the process. And that's really the value of our facilities data when we apply it the right way. Now, we have data on tens of thousands of facilities across the US, across all of our shippers, and we can work with any of our shippers to do this type of analysis and improvement. Stepping back, there's obviously a ton of curiosity about some of the insights we're seeing across the industry. So back in June, we launched our first facility insight report. It highlighted some of the overarching trends we saw across our facilities in the US. Back then, we had about 140,000 ratings. We were able to show things like regional breakdowns, time of day breakdowns, industry breakdowns. And just as a side point, the ratings weren't bad, right? They're in 4.1, 4.2. That's not bad. When we compare it to our ride sharing business, though, it is much lower. And so while some of our ratings aren't bad, there's definitely room to move the industry in the right direction. And more importantly, there's a number of really negative outliers across all of our shippers that we have an opportunity to work with them and improve that experience for the shippers and for the carriers. So we launched our first facility insight report back in June. I am very excited to announce that we're actually going to launch our next report coming in January of next year. And this time around, we have over 500,000 ratings, which allows us to get even deeper into the data than we were before. And you're going to see a lot of really interesting takeaways from that report. But a couple that we want to highlight as we start to think about how this really ties back to the value for our shippers and how they should interpret what a facility rating actually means for their business. So a couple interesting things. Our best performing facilities actually required half or less views from drivers before they were booked. Here's what that means. That means that drivers pay attention to this and they care what the facility rating is. And if it's not good, they're more than likely not to book that load. So as you think about making sure as a shipper you have reliable loads that are getting covered at a reasonable price, and you want that peace of mind, facility ratings are directly tied to the calculus that carriers make as they decide which loads they want to take. And here's another interesting point. We actually see over a 20% improved return rate from carriers for our highest rated facilities. Again, that means that these drivers who are familiar with your facilities, familiar with the dock doors, understand how to get in and out, know the staff, they're much more likely to return versus even the average, let alone our worst performing facilities. So as we think about making sure that our shippers and our facilities are creating the right facility experience for our drivers to ensure reliability and transparency, facility ratings are more and more showing us that there's a really interesting correlation and opportunity here to make sure that we're creating the right experiences for carriers. Now, both of these are examples of how you're going to see Uber Freight continue to help you as shippers quantify and understand the value of our facility ratings. And you pair that with our ability to operationally use that data to come help you improve facilities. We have a real game-changing service for our shippers that nobody else in the industry can match. Now, there's going to be a lot more data and interesting takeaways coming out in that report in January, so keep an eye out for it. And with that, I will close out. I want to thank everyone for their time, and I will open it up to a few questions.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Samir. That is so interesting. I love hearing about all of the new things that you guys are doing and the ways that you're transforming the industry. Really appreciate your insights here. As Samir mentioned, we'll go ahead and dive into the Q&A. So if you haven't already, please go ahead and submit those through the Q&A button in your viewer. So the first question, how do you determine on-time percentages? Are there appointment times included?
Yep, thank you for the question. So largely we work with our shippers to determine what they prefer, right? So if there's specific appointment times, it's easy. If it's first come, first serve, we'll work to figure out what the right schedule is for them. And we use our app. We use our app to geofence when drivers are actually hitting a facility. So we can see down to the minute when a driver has arrived at a facility, when they've unloaded, and when they're back out of a facility. And so we get really granular data on specific in and out times, and then can map that back to our scheduled times to understand what our on-time percentages are at a really granular level.
Okay, perfect. And next question for you. As a customer, how would I be able to access this data? Is there a portal to log into, or would we have to receive a breakout through our Uber Freight rep?
Yes, great question. So we actually do have a portal and give you access to all the information. It's called the Freight Insights Portal. It gives you an overview over the number of loads, on-time pick, on-time delivery, some of the insights we talked about today. In addition to that, if you're a customer with a dedicated account team, we actually can provide much more granular breakdowns and really specific metrics. So some of the things I showed on that last page around our newer Facility Insights report, we have a lot of views similar to that. We actually have full analyst teams that work on really customized cuts for our shippers. So there's actually several ways you can see both standardized views as well as really customized views, depending on your level of engagement with Uber Freight.
Okay, perfect. And next question, how do you analyze the ratings data? Is that mostly by star ratings, or are you pulling keywords?
Yes, great question. Both, actually. So we obviously look at ratings, right? So we look at ratings as a quantifiable, simple metric, and we'll compare that to basically similar cohorts of facilities. So we'll look at it versus facilities of that industry or the other facilities within that shipper's network, and we'll try to identify how well is a single facility doing or is a group of facilities doing versus other facilities. So that's one way where we use the actual data. We also pull keywords, right? So we do have long form open comments from our drivers, and we can see and pull out really key themes, right? So for example, we know that the vast majority of poor ratings are strongly correlated. I think it's something like 90% of poor ratings have something in the comments around long wait times and poor in and out, right? So we know that those are strongly correlated to high dwell times. And these are the types of insights that allow us to actually not just give you a score, but allow you to give you some insights as well into how you can actually go solve some of these problems with your teams.
Okay, perfect. And next question. You talked a lot about the facility ratings data, but what insights or actions do you derive from the geolocation data?
Yeah, so I think I understand the question. Let me answer it the way I think it's interpreted. So we use the geolocation data in several ways. So first, I mentioned earlier, we use geolocation data to trigger in and out times and to get a really specific sense of where our shippers are coming and going into facilities. We also use that for tracking purposes to understand where our drivers are along the load life cycle. We have a concept we talk a lot about at Uber Freight. It's this idea of a self-healing network. So as we can understand where our drivers are and get ahead of challenges, we can solve those problems without even needing to escalate those. And so that's a huge way we think about the value of our geolocation data. Specific to facilities, there's a couple other things we're doing. So one of the biggest challenges we've seen from drivers, and actually does relate back to our ratings data a little bit, is when you get to a facility, it can be really confusing to find the right dock doors, to know where to go to check in. We've actually have mapped at most of our facilities the ability to give you last mile directions, so you know exactly where to go when you get to that last mile. You know what to do when you enter that facility. You know where to go. And so we're starting to tie back some of our geolocation data to really value add specific challenges that we see consistently in this industry.
Okay, perfect. And I see you share facility ratings back to the shippers. Do you show those ratings to the drivers or carriers before they book a load? And if so, at what point do you do that?
Yeah, great question. So I showed you earlier the driver app. And actually in the app, when a driver goes to book a load, it's similar to, the way the flow works in the app is a driver can open it, they can see the loads available to them, and they can press a button and it'll show them the details. And they can actually see the ratings of the facilities during that flow. So we think this is really important, right? Because we want, one, to be transparent with our drivers, but two, it gives them an additional data point of where we're asking them to go and drop off and pick up loads. And so this is where we start to see interesting behaviors that I talked about at the end of that presentation. Based on the facility ratings, drivers may be more or less willing to book a load. They may be more or less willing to take a higher or lower price. They may be more or less willing to come back to that same load or that same facility. Based on some of the ratings we're seeing, you can start to suss out some of those interesting behaviors that drivers are actioning on.
Okay, great. And is there a cost associated with accessing the facility data via the portal, or is this something that Uber will offer to all shippers they do business with?
Yes, great question. So this is absolutely free. And in fact, we talk about the portal. That's a standardized tool that all shippers we work with have access to. I also mentioned some of the more customized work that we do with shippers, from going and doing operational visits to help them improve their facilities based on the data, to do some more customized, deeper insights. Again, these are all things we offer as part of Uber Freight service.
Okay,
and
perfect.
Sorry, just to clarify,
Yeah.
that last point, we offer all of that for free. That we don't charge an extra price for it.
Okay, great. And does Uber Freight provide similar information on delivery facilities?
Yes. So we receive ratings from drivers on both pickup and drop off. And we're able to get that information at both of those legs.
Okay, great. And next question, does Uber Freight also have carrier ratings? Meaning, do shippers have an opportunity to rate the performance of carriers that carry loads for them?
This is a great question as well. So this is not something we currently do, where our shippers rate our carriers. And there's several reasons for that, but we do have very strict and rigorous standards around our carriers. So everything from their on-time percentages to their roll rates and what we call bounces and bad bounces. All of these go into the quality of drivers and how we rate them internally. And many of our drivers, if they do not meet some relatively rigorous minimum standards, they cannot even take loads on our platform. So we don't have a direct method for shippers to evaluate carriers, but we do have a very rigorous methodology for how we ensure high quality with our drivers.
Okay, great. And then we will go ahead and take one more question here. For those of you in the audience who have submitted questions that we've not gotten to, we will be happy to follow up with you after the webinar using the email you used to register. So Samir, last question. Potentially, would a bad receiver with a bad rating affect the line haul rate to the shipper? Would two loads in the same lane, for example, from Memphis to Houston, be different prices if one receiver in Houston had a good rating and the other did not?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So as I mentioned earlier, we have seen we do see really different behavior changes from our drivers based on the ratings. And this is something that we're really interested in learning more about. And as we continue to get data, we may go down that route of starting to evaluate that exact situation. What I can tell you right now is we already know that the facility ratings matter in terms of how likely a driver is willing to book that load or how often they're going to return. And that obviously has implications to reliability, to price, to coverage. And so we definitely see that correlation, and we're interested as we continue to gather this data to go even deeper on potential ways we can use that.
Excellent. Well, everyone, we are going to go ahead and call it a wrap for today. So thank you, Samir, so much for being here with us today to share your insights. Thank you to all of you in the audience who submitted questions. We'll be sure to follow up with you after the webinar for those. And thank you again to Uber Freight for partnering with us on today's presentation. This has been super interesting, I know, for me, and I'm sure those of you listening in the audience as well. We've also had some questions about whether the recording will be available after this live session. It will be. You can expect to receive an email with a link to that recording within 24 hours. So we appreciate you all being here with us and hope you'll join us for another webinar again soon. Have a great afternoon.